shadow fleet, Russian shadow fleet versus NATO. Undersea cable sabotage threat. What's going on? What is going on undersea? What's going on in undersea and NATO and Russia? This is something that is very important for you to understand, and the reason you want to understand what's going on down there is because this might be the beginning of Russia-NATO interaction, potentially confrontation. And basically what they're doing, they are putting the pieces together very slowly. Over the past 2 years, we have seen a wave of suspicious maritime incidents, from Balticconnector pipeline damage. Now you have to understand that the cable, the internet that you are getting, right? The internet that you're getting, where do you think it comes from? Where do you think it, underneath the ocean, huge amount of cable going in onto the ocean, and you should see them appearing because I want you to understand what's going on. And basically they go through the ocean and they basically could connect everyone. It's not everything through satellite. And you got people out there working, to make sure that works properly. But recently, someone has been cutting the cable. Should you worry about that? Right? There was a Balticconnector. There was Balticconnector pipeline damage to simultaneous cable cuts in the Baltic Sea to Finland, charging a Russian shadow fleet tanker with sabotage 5 undersea cable. Finland complained, right? Russian shadow fleet was sabotaging 5 undersea cable. At the same time, Russia's spy ship Yantar has been loitering near Irish and North Atlantic cable hubs. What's going on? Well, basically, those ships are just, running around, doing their thing. We don't know exactly what they are. They're not Russian ships, not all of them. And everyone wants to wonder, what do we have happening? What is the concern? Right? What are they doing what they're doing? Don't they know that we're watching? Is this part of a bigger plan? I did a video very recently on the fact that the U.S. is getting ready for something. The U.S. is definitely arming up. The U.S. government has requested, has asked, and has pushed the weapon manufacturer in the U.S. to actually step up production. Why? You've seen lots of activities in the U.S. recently, right? You've seen, the National Guard. You've seen not the Army, but there's been some activities within those cities. Well, what's going on there? What are they doing? Well, on one side they'll tell you, oh, it's invasion of those, invasion of those cities by the government. Others will tell you, no, never look at what is the most obvious thing. Look at what they are not telling you. And what they're not telling you, they might be in the process of preparing. They might be in the process of training. Right? How do you move troops around, right? They got to practice these things. You can't just say, hey, go on a boat and go fight somewhere. No, you got to practice, you got to coordinate, you got to know what you need to do. And that's extremely important. And what's going on right now in the ocean, underneath, in Europe, someone has been cutting the cable. Someone has been running around with what we call shadow fleet activities for the past 2 years. And this channel is about, what's going on in the world. What is the next black swan to come up? The black swan is essentially an event that no one is really paying too much attention, or probably because they don't care or because they don't understand. And then they care very much when that event impacts your daily life. Now, we don't want a confrontation between the US and Russia, right? We definitely don't want something between NATO, or NATO and China and the US. But yet, these pieces are moving around the world in very, very interesting way. These aren't isolated events. They are part of a wider pattern. Russia targeting NATO's digital and energy backbone with hybrid, deniable tactics. Don't even want to mention the drone situation. Civilian ships dragging anchors and drone launch from tankers. So what they do, well, allegedly, is they basically drag the anchor near a cable, and oops, sorry, we just grabbed and we broke it. Okay, that's what they're doing down there, and there's enough for us to start worrying about. And how has Moscow reacted? Complete denial. I don't know what you're talking about. They've denied also all the activities with the drones. Okay, so they're calling it Western hysteria, blaming the weather or insisting their spy ships are just scientific research vessels. The playbook is clear: deny, deflect, and project confusion while keeping NATO guessing. Now, what they're basically saying is, we're not doing anything, but if you do something against us officially versus something that we have not done unofficially, then you want a war, right? That's what you want. And you might get it. And why? You need to understand, it's very important for you to grasp the concept that Russia is a war economy. Russia basically has a war economy. And that means that all they do is produce weapon, think about weapon, buy weapons, do lots of different things having to do with war. And a war economy cannot just stop at any moment in time. Keep that in mind. So let's break it down. We know which NATO countries are the most at risk. From Finland to Estonia. The hybrid warfare pattern linking these incidents, and what NATO's option really have when the threat isn't a missile strike, but the shadow fleet cutting the very cables that power the internet and economies. That is very troublesome what's going on. And I want you to be the first one to know about it. So let's talk about what are we talking about? Well, there's been increasing focus on what Russia is called, what we're calling the Russia Shadow Fleet. Tankers, merchant vessels operating under opaque ownership, frequently changing names and flags, suspected of sanction evasion as well as hybrid military uses. Maybe that's where the drones are coming from. They open the hatch, and when we had the situation with Ukraine and we had all of these drones attacking Russia, where did this drone come from? Well, they put them all into a truck. They drove the truck through in Russia, and then one day they opened it up and all those drones start flying towards their destination. In late September, early October 2025, the French Navy boarded and detained a tanker known as Pushpa, formerly Boracay. Keep changing the names off the coast of France. October 2025 in France. The vessel was suspected of lack of valid registration and possible involvement in drone operations over Denmark. That ship did not belong there. They did not respond to signal. They were boarded by the French Navy, which went in and checked everything out and basically took the captain and said the captain was indicted and he has to show up, if he ever shows up, sometime in 2026, early 2026. In late September, early October 2025, that's when it happened. Finland has charged the captain and crew of a Shadow Fleet tanker with aggravated vandalism, interference with telecommunications after the ship allegedly severed five undersea electrical and telecom cables in the Baltic Sea. This is happening. Hopefully it's going to make the news soon, but this is happening. The drones are happening and the undersea cable is happening. Why do you think you fight a war? Right? You prepare the terrain. That is a concern that you should all have, that maybe a war is getting ready, is getting prepared, is getting planned, is getting strategized. Okay? The Russian intelligence special submarine vessel, the Yantar, right, operated by naval intelligence, has been tracked near undersea cable junctions around Europe. And in the Irish Sea, very recently, there was an article. Take a look at it. What was this ship doing there? Raising concern about undersea surveillance and sabotage. You know what happens? One day, they may decide that you started something, and then they say, cut the power. No more cable. No more anything. Right? That is always a problem. Probing and close encounters at sea in the air. NATO officials report that Russian military aircraft regularly approach NATO warships in Europe waters. For example, a Russian I-20 surveillance plane was reported to have come within 600 meters of a German frigate in the Baltic Sea. During NATO wartime exercises in the Mediterranean, right, there is concern about the possibility of Russian ships shadowing or intercepting Allied vessels. Countries have scrambled jets and or other assets to unidentified Russian aircraft entering or approaching the NATO airspace. Although these are technically air incidents rather than ship to ship, they reflect maritime to maritime littoral zones of friction. Undersea infrastructure. What happened there? Well, and cable disruption. In November 2024, 2 submarine telecom data cables in the Baltic Sea were disrupted almost simultaneously. In the West Interlink and the Sea Line 1, while direct attribution remains uncertain. Western governments and intelligence circles have raised suspicion as these were acts of sabotage. So, it's really happening. And you should be concerned about that. Drone and aerial, well, there was another one. There was the Eagle S incident. In a more overt example, dragging anchor over long distances allegedly cut multiple cables, prompting criminal charges from Finland. Next, drone and aerial intrusion linked to maritime launch. Since some NATO and European analysts suspect that the shadow vessel may act as launch platform for drones, targeting critical infrastructure or conducting surveillance over NATO territory. September 2025, Russia launched a mass, we all heard about that one, mass drone incursion. 19 to 23 drone in Polish airspace. What's going on? You need to be aware. All these things are tallying it up. I don't want you to find out, we're into something. How did that happen? Before something happens, something else happens. Before you get into some sort of a war, you need to prepare for it. And that's what they're doing. They're putting the cables together. They're looking at it. They're checking. Maybe in the U.S., all of these activity that you're seeing in Chicago and in Washington, maybe they are starting to see, what is the best way to move troops around? How do we communicate with each other? You know what? This is the best tool to use when you want to communicate. Start using that in case something happens. Who knows? These are very, very strange events. So September 2025, Russia launched a mass drone from 19 to 23 drones into Polish airspace, triggering NATO force response. Poland invoked the Article 4 of the NATO treaty, but nothing happened. They they said you got to stop doing that. We said we didn't do anything, and that was it. Meanwhile, they could test the way they react. They could see, okay, let's see how long it takes before we go into their space before they start reacting and doing something. Poland invoked Article 4. While that incident is aerial in nature, it underscores the broader Russian tactic of probing NATO's defenses versus unnamed systems. The response and the deterrence by NATO. In response to growing threats, NATO has launched operations Baltic Sentry, to defend the infrastructure in the Baltic Sea, and Eastern Sentry to strengthen detection, defense, deterrence in maritime and air domains. But meanwhile, while you're doing that, Russia is observing what you're doing and trying to understand what it is that you're up to and how you're reacting. That's crucial. NATO allies are coordinating more closely now. Well, okay, fine, but undersea protection and hybrid threat tactics. So it's like the internet, it's the cables, it's the drone, right? Well, that's not a war. A war, you take the tanks. A war, you take the plane. A war, you put armies. No. This is not the next war is going to be. The same way when Israel, attacked Iran, what did they use? They used missiles. In fact, the U.S. gave lots of missiles to Israel that to the point they're being depleted right now. And that's why the U.S. is asking basically and telling their defense contractor, you got to double, you got to triple the amount of missile that you're producing. We're going to need this thing pretty soon. The shift towards hybrid maritime operations, shadow fleets, undersea activity, and drone launches indicate that much of the Russia-NATO friction is below the threshold of open conflict, making attribution harder and responses more legally, politically complex. But if you want to start something, that's the best way to do it, right? You basically say, I didn't do anything. You did it. You started it. I didn't do anything. So the question is this: how far is this going to go? Many of the most provocative acts, like the cable severing, that actually happened. Right? They cut the cable. It blurs the line. It blurs the line between civilian commerce and military aggression. NATO, right? The gas pipeline, that's right, the oil refinery. NATO challenges is to deter response without inadvertently escalating, especially in maritime zone where rules of engagement are contested. That's not your place. This is my place. I don't know. What are you talking about? I don't believe in that. And that's the issue that they're having right now. Next, and this is confirmed incident. Let's talk about the confirmed incident. And you tell me what you think. But basically in the Baltic Sea cable disruption between October and November 2024. That is the issue. So what are we saying? Well, what we're saying is this. There's been lots of activity in the Baltic Sea. There's been lots of activity under the sea with NATO's. And we need to understand what is going on. We need to figure out what are they doing. Because if you don't, then you're going to find yourself in a very dire situation. So what are we saying? Well, let me give you a quick recap. Essentially, what's going on is over the past 2 years, we have seen a wave of suspicious maritime incidents, from the Balticconnector pipeline damage to simultaneous cable. They were all cut in the Baltic Sea, right? And there was a Finland charging a Russia shadow fleet tanker with sabotaging 5 undersea cables. At the same time, Russia's spy ship, the Yantar, has been loitering near Irish and North American cable hubs. These aren't isolated events. They are part of a wide pattern. Russia targeting NATO digital and energy backbone and hybrid isolated tactics. That's what's happening. That's what it is that they are doing. And how has Moscow reacted? Well, with complete denial, calling it Western hysteria, blaming the weather, or insisting their spy ships are just scientific research vessels. The playbook is clear. We're going to deny, we're going to deflect, and project confusion. Tonight, let's take a look at that, because which NATO country is most at risk? And why is this happening to these countries? That is extremely for you to understand. Because what you're going to find out very soon is they might be ready for something much larger, much bigger, much more important. And just like COVID, you don't want to find out that COVID is out there. When it's out there, you want to prepare for it. It's very important to do that. So what are we talking about? What are some, what actually happened? Let me update you. Well, first of all, shadow, ghost fleet, and sanction invasion. European states have increasingly focused on what it's called the Russia shadow fleet. Tankers and merchant vessels operating under opaque ownership, frequently changing name and flag, suspected of sanctions. In late September to early October 2025, the French Navy very recently boarded and detained a tanker off the coast of France. The vessel was suspected of a lack of valid registration and possible involvement in drone operation in over Denmark. Remember Denmark? All these drones that were flying, right? And they actually stopped operation at the airport. It's annoying. It's not a war, but it's certainly sounds like a reason to start one at some point. Finland has charged the captain and crew of a shadow fleet tanker, the Eagle S, with aggravated vandalism and interference with telecommunications after the ship allegedly severed five undersea electrical and telecom cables. The Russian intelligence vessel, the Yantar, a naval intelligence arm, has been tracked near the undersea cable junctions around Europe. They're over there. They're moving back and forth, and we don't exactly know what they're doing, but they're there. These patterns illustrate how Russia is leveraging maritime assets to non-kinetic and hybrid pressure rather than just open naval confrontation. The question is, what is it that you're doing? Why are you doing these things? Right? Because it's happening. Well, maybe we're just testing NATO resolve, testing NATO coerciveness. Is the U.S. going to back up NATO? Probing close encounters at sea. NATO officials report that Russian military aircraft regularly approach NATO warships in European waters. For example, a Russian I-20 surveillance plane was reported to have come within 600 meters of a German frigate in the Baltic Sea. During NATO maritime exercises, there is concern about the possibility of Russian ships shadowing or intercepting Allied vessels. Undersea infrastructure. In November 2024, 2 submarine telecom data cables in the Baltic Sea were disrupted. They literally disrupted almost simultaneously at the same time. While direct attribution remains uncertain, Western governments and intelligence circles have raised suspicion as to, if they were acts of sabotage, possibly connected to Russian or Russian-linked operators. Was it a big misunderstanding? The Eagle S incident is a more overt example. Now this one, they literally dragged an anchor over long distances, allegedly, and it cut multiple cables, prompting criminal charges from Finland. The cables got cut for real, but they didn't go there with a scissor and cut it. They just that the anchor was down there, and they dragged the anchor, and obviously, eventually you pulled and you bust it open, like this cable that you see behind me. That's what it looks like. And That's a problem. None, of course, I mean, I'm not going to remind you, but you've got yourself the drone situation. Some NATO European analysts suspect that the Shadow Fleet vessel may act as a launch platform for drones, especially for reconnaissance, right? So reconnaissance, surveillance over NATO territory. In September 2025, Russian launched a mass drone incursion, 19 to 23 drones. You know, past 2 years, it's happening. They sent it into Polish airspace, triggering NATO force response. Poland involved Article 4, but nothing happened. Nothing happened. When they talk about it, they say, you shouldn't be doing this. So in response to this, right, the NATO has launched Operation Baltic Sentry and Eastern Sentry, one to defend infrastructure and two to protect the eastern flank. We got to put something together, right? We got to do something. Because Russia is not stopping. Russia is saying, I didn't do anything. I don't know what you're talking about. But whatever you do, don't attack me. I'm just testing at this point. Now, the shift is an interesting shift because it's a shift towards hybrid maritime operations. Indicate that much of the Russia and NATO friction is below the threshold or to an open conflict. There's no plane and boat and army across the... No, it's just a different type of attack. Except that no one says, well, this is not war. I mean, nobody's invading anyone, so maybe this is not a war. Well, many of the most provocative acts like cable severing or ambiguous vessel registration blur the line between civilian commerce and military aggression. Maybe what they should say is, okay, let's to be clear, even though you're not invading us, if you have a drone, if you have a plane, and if you're close to, we consider this aggression. We are going to do something. But right now, unfortunately, it's not being recognized as such, so they keep doing it. Not so much that Russia wants to go to war, but if they're provoked, they have don't forget, they have a war economy. And they will get into it if they need to. The Baltic Sea cable disruption, October and to November 2024, 2 major submarines were disrupted. These cables were disrupted almost simultaneously at the same time. How could that be? One is a Balticconnector gas pipeline and cable, so you have gas and cable going through it, Finland to Estonia in October 2023. It was damaged by a Chinese flag vessel and a Russian linked tanker. To attribution were debated. Finland said it was likely deliberate. So here you have a Russian ship and a Chinese ship at the same time in the same area, and yet something happened. Right? Don't forget that there's been Russia and China have done some war games together this year to coordinate. The Eagle S incident in the Baltic Sea, the Russian operated Shadow Fleet tanker Eagle 5 dragged its anchor in seabed for 18 miles, cutting five undersea power and telecom cables. You're going to watch this video and this live later on, and you're going to say, wow, that's exactly what's happening. Finland indicted the ship's Russian captain and crew for aggravated sabotage and interference with telecommunication. The case is ongoing, but Western security services see this as the clearest example of deliberate Russian hybrid warfare at sea. But it's not war, it's warfare. Still, the Russian spy oceanographic vessel Yantar, run by the Russian Navy Deep Sea Intelligence Arm, has been observed lingering around Undersea Cable Junction near Ireland now. We're going we're not talking Ukraine anymore. We are within France. We're in England, in the UK, Norway. While no confirmed cuttings has been directly attributed to the Yantar, they didn't see the guy getting out of the submarine and cutting it. You know, intelligence threats this presence as preparatory reconnaissance for possible future cable disruption. So basically what they do is they find out where the cables are. They know how to get there, right? When the time comes and they said, we're on, let's do it, that's it. No more contact with Europe. No more news, nothing. And this is where they start. Do not underestimate the power of such chess maneuvers. These people in politics and also in geopolitics do not do this like a checkers game. They plan 2, 3, 4 steps ahead. So what they're doing right now, they're setting up the areas, right? They know exactly where their cables are. They know what to do. That's one attack. They're not just going to do that. Then you go on land and you do sea, right? But by that time you cut all the cables, you're completely lost. And they're getting away with it right now. Okay, and that's a problem, right? The most affected country. Let's talk about the countries that who's going after these people. Like who's crying? Who's in trouble, right? Who's in trouble? Well, I will say this: that Finland, for example, is in trouble. Finland is in trouble because they're the most affected. Balticconnector pipeline and telecom cable, October 2033, damaged, like I said before, between Finland and Estonia. Finland declared it a likely deliberate sabotage in 2024. So that was October 2023, right? Now we are talking about November 2024, the Sea Line 1 internet cable cut, disrupting connections. The Eagle S tanker 2024 indicted for dragging anchor and cutting 5 cables. So they cut the cables, they disrupted communications, right? And they damaged another cable, October 2023, November 2024, and then 2024. Finland. Estonia partnered with Finland in the Balticconnector. Disruption impacted Estonia connectivity, showing vulnerability to Baltic transaction route. They lost connections. Estonia waters also frequently see Russian naval or shadow fleet presence. Denmark, suspected launch zone for Russian drones, possibly supported by shadow fleet tankers operating on shore. Denmark has raised alarms about increased Russian activity around the Northeast. So we talk about Denmark, we're talking about Estonia, we're talking about Finland. Germany. German naval official report regular harassment by Russian reconnaissance aircraft near NATO warships. Germany is vulnerable with key undersea cables that link it to Scandinavia and the UK. Right? So this is not something that is just coincidental. Norway. Russian vessels have been observed in the Norwegian Sea, where undersea cables support both military communications, offshore energy infrastructure. Norway is highly exposed due to its role in gas pipeline and North Atlantic data routes. And United Kingdom, believe it or not. Russian vessel activity near the island and the northeast. That is very recent, getting more and more dicier. In summary, the core NATO states have been targeted, most recently with the North Atlantic hubs, the Baltic front line. So this is something, and that's of great concern. Now, what is going on? That is the point. What is going on? And we shall see. We shall follow it to really understand what is going on. So what is Russia saying? What has been the Russian reaction? Well, when you had the Balticconnector damage in October 2023 and Finland accused a Russian linked vessel, the Russian reaction: denied involvement, called the accusation unfounded, claimed the ship was on normal commercial transit, suggested Finland was using the incident to stir anti-Russian hysteria. Be careful, because you keep pushing on them. Then they're going to say, now you're being mean, now you attack me, now let's have a real war. Number 2, Baltic Sea simultaneous cable. Remember that? I talked to you about that. November 2024. NATO states raised suspicions of coordinated sabotage because both a Chinese ship and a Russian ship together. Well, the Russians basically dismissed the allegation as Western propaganda, framed the outage as technical faults or the result of bad weather. I mean, it's a joke. They don't even care, quite frankly. They do not care. Number 3, Eagle Shadow Fleet tanker. Finland indicated the Russian captain and crew for aggravated assault. It was indicted. Russian reaction? State outlets insisted it was a navigational accident due to poor weather. The Russian Foreign Ministry warned against politicizing maritime incidents. Hopefully you see the pattern, right? You're picking on me. You are picking on me, and stop doing it. I do not like it. The Russian spy ship Yantar, okay, the one we talked about, Western press highlighted Yantar's presence near cable junctions. Russia's reaction? It claimed the Yantar is an oceanographic research vessel conducting scientific surveys. What are you talking about? It accused NATO of militarizing civilian science ships. They love it. No acknowledgement of intelligence role despite Yantar's well-known ties to the naval intelligence in Russia. The broader accusation, NATO creation of the Baltic Sentry and the Eastern Sentry operation to monitor the cable. That's what they have. In response, Moscow accused NATO of inventing threats to justify militarization of the Baltic and North Atlantic. And remember what they say, I do not want to see the shadow of a NATO soldier. And you guys are using these reasoning for which are not real to basically build up and remember what I did to Ukraine. Russia, I believe that Russia wants to get on it again. Why? They are a war economy. They got to do something. They can't go back to do what they were doing before. That's impossible. They got to keep going. Russia warned NATO's presence near its maritime border was provocative and destabilizing. State media cast NATO cable protection mission as cover for Western espionage. So that's what's happening, folks. And that's a problem because you have a bunch of weird activities going on, like shadow fleet activities. Look at the map. If you could see the map, you could see, it's all over the place. They're doing all these things. Why are they doing them? Because then when NATO says, what are you doing? They say, what do you mean what I'm doing? You're using these fake incidents to build up more and more army, more and more protection, more and more NATO-based infrastructure, which I hate, towards Russia. And that's what I've been telling my people all along, that NATO is out after us, and this is one reason. At the end of the day, maybe Russia just wants a reason to fight. Maybe NATO wants a reason to get in there and start it. Is the U.S. ready? Right? Is the U.S. ready? Well, obviously they're trying to do something. They're calling itself now the War Department. There was a bunch of discussion. The president is pushing for more activities with the defense company. Is that going to be enough? Are we preparing for something larger? These are the events that we will start to follow.